to protect and support First Nations, Inuit and Métis women and girls who face higher rates of violence than others. And, Mr. Speaker, an $18.5 million to support victims of domestic violence and human trafficking survivors, find and maintain safe housing. We remain committed to supporting victims of domestic violence, human trafficking, and other violent crimes. This is a government that will always stand up for victims, because every law-abiding citizen deserves to be protected. Mr. Speaker, our investments not only protect people from COVID-19, they also build a better healthcare system for tomorrow, so that in Ontario, people can always receive the care they need. Because without healthy people, we cannot have a healthy economy. And, Mr. Speaker, that brings me to the second pillar of our plan. Overwhelmingly, the people and employers of our province have done what it takes to protect each other from COVID-19, even when these sacrifices have impacted their livelihoods. We recognize these sacrifices, and today we are taking further steps to provide direct support to the families, workers and employers who have sacrificed so much. Ontario's action plan, Protecting People's Health and Our Economy, brings the government's total investment to protect Ontario's economy to $23.3 billion. Mr. Speaker, every parent in Ontario has faced new pressures due to COVID-19. For some, that includes financial challenges caused by the pandemic. For many, it includes new expenses to support virtual learning or childcare. And for all, it includes anxiety about their child's future in a world that will look different than it does today. Now, while our government can't make this pressure go away, we can provide a helping hand. So to put more money in parents' pockets, we are providing a third round of payments through the Ontario COVID-19 Child Benefit. This announcement today brings the total direct support we have provided families since March of 2020 to $1.8 billion. Mr. Speaker, the payment will be doubled to $400 per child and $500 per child for each child with special needs. And consider what that means for a family with 3 young children, including one with special needs. They will have received $2,600 through the Ontario COVID-19 Child Benefit. That is real and meaningful relief. It won't solve every problem, but it helps. And it's one of the simplest, quickest, and most direct ways we can make a difference. Mr. Speaker, few pressures parents face are more significant than the cost of childcare. Nearly every economist I speak to says making childcare more affordable is one of the key ways to ensuring a robust recovery from COVID-19, not to mention a vital factor in creating the growth necessary for long-term prosperity. I also hear it directly from parents. Too many tell me the high cost of childcare will keep them out of the workplace. And this burden is not borne equally. Just as the virus hits different people with different levels of severity, so too does the economic impact of the pandemic. And it is abundantly clear women have been significantly impacted. While employment among men is currently down by 3.3%, it is down by nearly 5% for women. In large part, this is because more women have tended to work in the jobs most affected by the necessary public health measures and restrictions. And the challenges have been exacerbated by the high cost and lack of access to childcare spaces. Mr. Speaker, no one should be prevented from getting back to work because they can't afford childcare. So we are proposing a temporary 20% enhancement to the care tax credit for 2021. This would increase support from about $1,250 to $1,500 on average per family. In total, it would provide about $75 million in additional relief for over 300,000 families. Mr. Speaker, this is extra money back into families' pockets to cover expenses like childcare, after-school programs, even summer camp. We also need to ensure childcare is available to parents. That's why our government pledged to create 30,000 new childcare spaces, and I'm pleased to report that we are more than two-thirds of the way to meeting that pledge. With this new capacity, our enhanced care tax credit, and the third round of payments to parents, Ontario families will be stronger, and Mr. Speaker, strong families make a strong province. Mr. Speaker, we are also supporting students. COVID-19 has disrupted their routines and changed how they are taught. Mr. Speaker, young people have been among those disproportionately impacted by the economic impacts of the pandemic. So we are protecting students today, but also investing in their success for tomorrow. We have led the country with close to $1.7 billion to protect students and keep students safe, including $100 million to improve classroom ventilation. We will also invest $14 billion over the next 10 years to build and upgrade schools, like the first new school in Pickering in over 20 years, which will serve 536 students. It'll serve 536 students and create 73 licensed childcare spaces. And all told, we are investing $550 million, Mr. Speaker, in the 2021 school year to support 16,000 new learning spaces across 28 schools. And of course, Mr. Speaker, ensuring remote and online learning can be delivered for students has become vitally important during the pandemic, which is why we're investing $40 million to improve remote learning technology. This is an important step, but there is another factor that is holding our students back. Mr. Speaker, we heard from a principal during the second wave when the public health situation meant classes had to be 100% virtual. The principal said their rural school was ready to teach online, except most of their students didn't have a quality, reliable internet connection. In the province of Ontario, in the year 2021, that is simply unacceptable. We are going to fix it with the most ambitious investment in internet connectivity in Canadian history. To connect homes, businesses and schools to broadband, our government is supercharging our investment with another $2.8 billion, bringing the province's total investment to nearly $4 billion in 6 years. Mr. Speaker, just as railways and highways were being built 100 years ago to physically connect this vast province, our government will undertake this monumental province-building project to connect people virtually, so that no student ever falls behind because they don't have internet, so that no entrepreneur is ever held back from starting the business of their dreams, and so that no grandparent is ever cut off from their loved ones. And I look forward to holding a video conference with that school principal to thank her for her advocacy for her students. A video conference on a reliable internet connection delivered through this historic investment. Mr. Speaker, too many of our neighbours lost their jobs since this pandemic began. Workers in some industries, including hospitality, retail, tourism, have been more affected than others. So have women, youth, and racialized people. They lost their jobs through no fault of their own, but rather to a virus that has required unprecedented restrictions on our economy to keep each other safe. It simply is not fair. And these workers deserve our support getting back to work. For some, that may mean exploring opportunities in a new industry. And in many parts of the economy, employers are hiring, including in construction, manufacturing, and long-term care. But this often requires going back to school, which costs money at a time when their personal finances may have already been stretched to the limit. So to help workers with their training expenses, the government is proposing a new temporary Ontario jobs training tax credit for 2021. Mr. Speaker, it would provide up to $2,000 per recipient for 50% of eligible expenses. This is estimated to provide $260 million in support for about 230,000 people this year. Consider what that means for hope. a 27-year-old who lost her job due to the pandemic. She decides to go back to school to start a new career. Say her tuition is $4,050. Hope will receive $2,000 from the Ontario Jobs Training Tax Credit, making retraining a more accessible option to consider. So, Mr. Speaker, we are building on this relief with more employment and trading support because we know it makes a difference. I remember hearing about a worker who had been laid off from a job in manufacturing, and he used our services to retrain. And, Mr. Speaker, he decided to become a personal support worker, turning a personal economic loss into an opportunity to care for people in his community. And, Mr. Speaker, we want to help more people like this worker. So we are making an investment of $614 million to provide workers with employment training support, and $117 million of that is specifically for people most affected, including women, youth, people with disabilities, racialized and Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, I want to point out Hope's story is one of many where her career could be in the skilled trades. As the Minister of Labour and Training and Skills Development never fails to point out, there are more jobs available in the skilled trades than qualified workers. These jobs are high-paying, rewarding opportunities to build a career and support a family. They also allow you to help build your community and your province. And with our government's plan to spend more than $145 billion over the next 10 years on infrastructure, including the largest subway expansion in Canadian history, making GO Transit a comprehensive all-day rapid transit network, bringing passenger rail service to the north, and historic investments in highways, there will be no shortage of opportunities to play a role in rebuilding Ontario. And, Mr. Speaker, to help more workers and students get into the skilled trades, our government is investing $288 million this year in the skilled trade strategy to help people find a career that they wouldn't trade. To help more workers like Hope. So, Mr. Speaker, one of the most significant inequities of the pandemic has been in the impact on small business owners and their employees who have faced significant restrictions. And for our government, it has been among the heaviest burdens that we bear. And although I know that burden is infinitely heavier for the small businesses affected, and that's why in January we announced the Ontario Small Business Support Grant for employers affected by the province-wide shutdown. Mr. Speaker, to date, about 100,000 eligible small businesses have already seen funds flow into their bank accounts. Businesses in communities from Sarnia to Sault Ste. Marie, from Kenora to Kitchener, from Brockville to Barrie. I've heard from someone who said this support is the difference between keeping the lights on and turning them off for good. So as we roll out the vaccines, we recognize small businesses are still struggling and will face additional expenses and more pressure as things get back to normal. So today, we are announcing a second payment to the Ontario Small Business Support Grant so that eligible small businesses will automatically receive a second payment in the amount equal to their first. Mr. Speaker, this will bring the estimated total support provided through this grant to $3.4 billion. And, Mr. Speaker, in total, our government is providing small businesses $6.3 billion in relief in 2021, which includes lower electricity bills, lower taxes, and lower payroll costs. And consider what this means for a small retail store in Markham. They could receive two payments of $20,000 through the Ontario Small Business Grant, a $1,000 Ontario Main Street PPE grant, and $1,630 in property tax and energy cost rebates. Mr. Speaker, that's $42,630 in direct support. This protects jobs now and in the future. Mr. Speaker, people in the tourism, hospitality, culture, sports, and recreation industries have been particularly hard hit by the necessary public health restrictions. In fact, 140,000 tourism and hospitality jobs were lost between February of 2020 and February of 2021. Today, Ontario is investing an additional $400 million to support these employers, bringing our total support to more than $625 million since the pandemic began. And, Mr. Speaker, it will include the new Ontario Tourism and Hospitality Small Business Support Grant, targeted specifically at some of the hardest-hit businesses, including hotels, overnight summer camps, and amusement parks. And that will provide an estimated $100 million in one-time payments of between $10,000 and $20,000 to eligible small businesses. Because, Mr. Speaker, with these additional measures, we will ensure that Ontario remains a terrific place to discover. Mr. Speaker, while all of us have been affected by COVID-19, some have been affected more than others. Our government support is designed to ease the burden for those who have been carrying more of the load during this difficult year. As I've said, women in particular have been disproportionately affected, and it's clear we are experiencing a she-cession. It's why we are taking action to support affected workers and small business owners, improve access and affordability for childcare, and support survivors of increased domestic violence. And, Mr. Speaker, as a father of two wonderful daughters, a husband, a son, a grandson, the disproportionate impact on women is troubling to me on a personal level. That's why the Associate Minister responsible for children and women's issues and I will establish a task force to advise the government on how to address the unique and disproportionate economic barriers that women face. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, when we all have an opportunity, an equal opportunity, all of us do better. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize the critical leadership of strong, capable, brilliant women during this pandemic. People like Dr. Barbara Yaffe, who has advised our government. People like the Minister of Health, whose steady leadership we have counted on. Like the Minister of Long-Term Care, a medical doctor who has worked tirelessly to protect the most vulnerable. Like the Solicitor General, who has guided our emergency response. And, Mr. Speaker, like the Leader of the Opposition, who has played such an important role holding our government to account. Mr. Speaker, all of us are better for their leadership and contributions. We have made much progress, and yet we still have so much more to do. We must also do better for Indigenous and racialized people. Systemic racism is a reality, including here in Ontario. It is a reality we must change. A long overdue conversation on race is underway, but a conversation, however frank, is not enough. It is time for action. That is why we made a $60 million investment in the Black Youth Action Plan last fall. It is why we are investing $117 million in employment and training supports for those most affected by the pandemic. And it is why we are taking another step with the Anti-Racism and Anti-Hate Grant, which will support community-based anti-racist initiatives. Mr. Speaker, hate spreads when allowed to fester, so let us all resolve to speak out against hatred when we see it, and work together to build a more inclusive province each and every day. And as we look beyond COVID-19, let us make it our shared goal that nobody is left behind. Truly sustainable growth must be inclusive growth. It must, Mr. Speaker, include everyone. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have outlined our action plan to beat COVID-19, to put it behind us, to get that job done. I will conclude with an update on our province's economic and fiscal situation. As a student of history, I cannot deliver that update without thinking of others other challenging times in our challenging past. When Leslie Frost rose in the House to deliver his budget in 1945, perhaps in this very seat, he declared that the legislature was meeting in difficult days, that we had a difficult path ahead, that he was standing in a wartime legislature delivering a wartime budget. Mr. Speaker, thank God we're not in a world war, and yet the circumstances of today share some similarities to when Minister Frost stood in this place. The people of Ontario are united in a battle against a common enemy. The job is not done. The enemy is not yet defeated. And as the Minister of Finance and President of the Treasury Board, my job is to ensure we make every resource available to win our battle against the virus, and we have. Mr. Speaker, the Ontario government is projecting to spend $173 billion in 2021-22, and when you consider that the government spent $148.8 billion in 2018-2019, it's clear that we have spared no expense to defeat COVID-19. Of course, as it has for governments around the world, this spending has resulted in record deficits. We project the deficit will be $33.1 billion in 2021-22. And while this is neither sustainable nor desirable forever, I'm absolutely, unequivocally convinced it is necessary to get through the pandemic and to recover stronger. And in fact, I believe the price of inaction would be much, much higher in terms of lost lives, jobs, and prosperity. Because, as I've said, you cannot have a healthy economy without healthy people. Mr. Speaker, in this budget, we once again outlined 3 economic and fiscal scenarios to be as transparent as possible about the uncertainty that remains in our global economy and the risk to our province's finances. We will continue to be transparent with regular updates as the situation continues to evolve. There is no doubt that our return to fiscal sustainability will take many, many years. Some would tell us that tax hikes or cuts to public services are the only way to get there. They are wrong. The other path is to get Ontario growing again. And I am convinced that along with a modern government and a federal partner who pays their fair share, economic growth is the key to our fiscal recovery. And that growth will create jobs, provide revenues to support critical public services, and ensure a sustainable financial position. Since 2018, we have strengthened the foundation of our province's economy. Later this year, our government will release our plan to strengthen the conditions for long-term economic growth. We are already taking important steps today, positioning Ontario to be a leader in electric vehicle manufacturing, creating Invest Ontario and the $400 million Invest Ontario Fund, making the province a top-tier destination for investment, and proposing to double the Regional Opportunities Investment Tax Credit to encourage growth in regions that have fallen behind, which all builds on the actions we took last November to remove barriers to growth that would have otherwise held Ontario back from a strong economy and recovery. We've done that by reducing high electricity rates, by removing taxes on jobs, and lowering unfair high business education property taxes. So while we can create the conditions, it will be the people and employers who create the actual growth. Which brings me, Mr. Speaker, back to the Ontario spirit. When the people of this province put their minds to something, they make it happen. So today, I'm putting the world on notice. Don't bet against the people of Ontario. We will succeed. We have chosen growth, and as sure as I'm standing here today right beside the Premier and all my colleagues and our government, we will grow stronger than ever. Because when Leslie Frost stood in this place in 1945, he said that victory is assured if we adhere to our determination to win. Mr. Speaker, we are going to defeat this pandemic because I know the province of this people. I know that they are determined to win. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, as we face down this historic challenge, there's no place I'd rather be. Like so many others in this province, my family's story is an immigrant story. Both of my parents left Hungary as refugees because of World War II. It was here in Ontario that they met, married, they built a life in Canada and raised a family. And today, their son has the privilege to serve as the Minister of Finance. Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, that is the Ontario story. Mr. Speaker, that is the Ontario dream. And we must all work to ensure that it can be the Ontario story for every person in this province, that it can be everybody's dream. And occasionally I step back during a conversation with a constituent and I reflect on how likely it is that they have a story or dream similar to mine, of families from around the world that chose to settle here. Those choices mean we get to pull from the very best of the entire world. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that the 14.7 million people of Ontario can accomplish anything when we work towards a common goal. Our people's hard work, ingenuity, and drive for better, stronger families and communities will set us on a path that restores Ontario's place as the economic engine of this country. Mr. Speaker, the Premier calls it the Ontario spirit.
Titled, An Act to Implement Budget Measures and to Enact and Amend Various Statutes, and that it now be read for the first time. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried.
This is a bill entitled, An Act to Implement Budget Measures and to Enact and Amend Various Statutes. First reading of the bill, première lecture du projet de loi.
Does the minister wish to give a brief explanation of his bill? I think he already has. Thank you. Thank you. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adjournment of the House.
Mr. Callander is moving the adjournment of the House. It's the pleasure of the House that the motion carry. Carried. This House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m.